Welcome back, old friends, and a special greeting to new visitors. In the magical world of Harry Potter, there are two types of magic: the accepted and commonly used magic, and the dark magic, which is feared, condemned, and often left in the shadows. But what if we look deeper into dark magic than the canon allows? Because Harry is closely associated with the forces of good, the topic of the dark arts was only partially explored in the books, through fragments, hints, or additional sources. Today I invite you on a journey into the shadowed side of the wizarding world, into the realm of forbidden knowledge, destructive spells, and ancient curses. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The dark arts include any magic intended to cause harm. Unlike standard magic, the dark arts are not strictly about summoning demons or contacting spirits. Rather, the term describes any form of magic used to hurt, control, or destroy. The key is intention. Theoretically, even the simplest spell can be dark if it's cast with harmful intent. Number 2, one must truly desire to cause harm. Not everyone can use dark magic effectively. Bellatrix Lestrange makes this very clear in the books. You need to really mean it. That's why Harry failed to cast the Cruciatus Curse on her. He lacked the emotional cruelty. However, later in the series, Harry successfully used the same curse on Amicus Carrow. What changed? In that moment, he truly wanted to cause pain. Number 3. Dark magic is not always evil. This may seem contradictory, but not all uses of dark magic are inherently evil. Take Snape, for example. He killed Dumbledore. But it was a planned act done out of mercy and love at Dumbledore's own request. Even Harry used the Imperius Curse to infiltrate Gringotts and retrieve a Horcrux. In both cases, the spell was dark, but the motivation was not malevolent. Number 4. Injuries caused by dark magic don't fully heal. In the wizarding world, most injuries can be healed with a flick of a wand. But when dark magic is involved, that's not always the case. Harry's lightning bolt scar is a lasting reminder of Voldemort's curse. Other examples include Dumbledore's cursed hand, George's missing ear, and Bill's werewolf bite. These injuries, caused by dark magic, never fully healed. Number 5. Some magical creatures are inherently dark. Certain beings are not cursed or twisted, they are born of darkness. A prime example is the basilisk, a creature bred by a dark, Parselmouth wizard. But the most chilling example is the Dementor, a creature formed from despair, pain, and decay. They are darkness, and by their very nature, they are evil. Number 6. Not all wands are suited for dark magic. Wand lore is a deeply personal and complex subject, but some wand cores are particularly ill-suited for dark magic. Take unicorn hair, for instance. As Ollivander noted, wands with unicorn hair cores are extremely pure and sensitive. They may weaken or even die if used for evil. Interestingly, Draco Malfoy's wand had a unicorn hair core, suggesting that, deep down, he was never truly capable of great darkness. Number 7. Ordinary objects can be turned into dark ones. Throughout the books we see how common items can be cursed through dark magic. Often this is done to trick unsuspecting muggles or witches and wizards into using a dangerous object, like a teapot, a trash bin, or a piece of jewelry. The most extreme example? A Horcrux, an object used to store a torn piece of soul. Not only are Horcruxes nearly impossible to destroy, but they also corrupt those who carry or come near them. Number 8. Dark magic is allowed to a degree. In Britain, dark magic is technically outlawed, but only partly. The unforgivable curses are forbidden, yes, but the dark arts as a whole are more complex. Take the shop, Borgin and Burke's. It operates legally, selling clearly dark and dangerous artifacts. Some of these objects, like the Vanishing Cabinet, aren't inherently dark, but others, like the cursed necklace Draco used against Katie Bell, are unquestionably dangerous. Owning such items for personal collection, legal. Using them to harm others, strictly forbidden. Number 9. The most terrifying spells were invented manually. Not all spells are ancient. Some were made, crafted in silence, far from classrooms and rules. While most magic in the wizarding world is passed down, taught, refined, inherited, dark magic is often invented. It grows in isolation, in obsession. It's not just learned, it's created. And sometimes it's created by a student with a sharp mind and a wounded heart. Severus Snape was only a boy when he wrote Sectum Sempra into the margins of his potions book. For enemies, he noted, no teacher had shown it to him, no textbook mentioned it. But the spell worked like a blade, cutting through flesh and bone in a flash of invisible violence. When Harry used it on Draco in Half-Blood Prince, the result was horrifying. Blood everywhere, shock in his own eyes. This wasn't classroom magic, it was a weapon, and it reminds us darkness isn't always found. Sometimes it's invented by hands too clever and too angry. Number 10. Horcruxes are the peak of darkness, but not the only path. The Horcrux is the darkest magic known, a ritual that demands murder and tears the soul apart. It grants a twisted form of immortality, but it isn't the only path to power. Some wizards feared splitting their soul, but still sought strength through the shadows. They turned to older, quieter rituals, ones that didn't kill the soul outright, but stained it all the same. These were called occult bonds, connections forged with cursed objects, blood-soaked stones, or relics that pulsed with ancient malice. The magic didn't promise eternal life, but it offered something close: power, rage, control. Temporarily, the wizard's magic grew sharper, faster, but the cost was always steep. Animal sacrifice was common. Some even fed on the emotions of muggles: fear, sorrow, pain. In the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, there are whispers of such methods, hidden in books with cracked spines and chained covers. Dumbledore once said the dark arts are many, varied, ever-changing, and eternal. The Horcrux was only one path. But the forest of darkness runs deep, and not all who enter leave the same. Number 11. Spells can become corrupted by dark magic. Magic can rot, that's what some auras believe. When a spell is cast too often with hatred, it starts to twist, to change. This phenomenon is called distortion. Take Petrificus Totalis, for example. It's meant to freeze the body, harmless, temporary. But in some cases, after repeated use by dark-minded wizards, the effects became violent. Seizures, unconsciousness, even death. One aura report told of a duel where the victim never woke up. The caster had used Petrificus 3 times, each one sharper than the last. By the third, it broke something inside. Magic, then, is not static. It listens. It remembers the hand that shaped it. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are." That includes how we choose to use magic. Feed a spell with anger, and it begins to carry anger in its very form. It becomes something else, not because the spell changed, but because the wizard did. And in the end, the magic answers back in kind. Number 12. Dark spells can cling to the soul. Some spells never truly leave you. Dark magic can cling to the soul like smoke to cloth. It marks the wizard, not just in memory, but in magical signature. Mad-Eye Moody once said he could feel it, sense it, on those who had cast the unforgivable curses. "You can always tell," he muttered in Goblet of Fire, scanning faces with his magical eye. The aura lingers. Investigators from the Ministry used this trace to identify former Death Eaters, even after they tried to run, even after they claimed to change. But the true damage runs deeper. Those who used the killing curse or Cruciatus too often weren't just detected, they were changed. It started with dreams. Then came the nightmares, whispers, a soft voice in the dark that sounded like their own. There were rumors that some Death Eaters heard screams long after the spell was cast, not from victims, but from inside themselves. Magic like that leaves a scar no potion can heal, a weight you carry in silence. Voldemort was the extreme. His soul was shattered by choice, by repetition. Every time he used dark magic, a little more of him unraveled. He killed without blinking. But even he wasn't free from consequence. His face twisted, his body warped, his voice lost its warmth. It wasn't just evil, it was damage. The magic didn't just obey him, it devoured him. And in the end, there was barely anything left to cling to life, just the echo of spells that once obeyed a man who no longer resembled one. Number 13. There are schools where dark arts are studied openly. Hogwarts taught defense. Never attack. The dark arts were treated like a disease, something to be studied only in order to fight it. But not every school saw it that way. Durmstrang, the cold and secretive wizarding institute in the north, welcomed the study of dark magic. It wasn't hidden, it was part of the curriculum. Viktor Krum, one of Durmstrang's most famous students, once told Hermione, "Durmstrang does not condone the use of the dark arts, but it teaches them. It is important to know, no? In their eyes, magic is power. How you use it, that's the real question." It's a different philosophy. Durmstrang doesn't demonize the dark, it dissects it. Students there don't just learn counter curses, they learn the source. They understand the structure of the Cruciatus Curse. They study magical theory behind blood-based rituals. They read about possession, soul-splitting, and mind control, not as horror stories, but as tools. Dangerous tools, yes, but no more forbidden than fire or poison. It's knowledge, and knowledge to them is never evil in itself. But that raises a question that haunts every wizard who's ever looked too long into the dark. Can someone study it and not become it? Can you walk through fire and not get burned? Durmstrang believes you can. That discipline matters more than fear. But in the world of Harry Potter, history shows otherwise. Grindelwald studied at Durmstrang, and he left it with a hunger for power that tore the world apart. So was it the school that shaped him? Or something that was always inside him? Number 14. Dark artifacts can possess their own will. Some dark artifacts don't just contain magic. They are magic, living, breathing, thinking, twisted by the intent of those who created them. These objects aren't passive tools. They influence, corrupt, wait, and sometimes they speak. The most haunting example is Tom Riddle's diary. At first it seemed harmless, a blank journal in an old bookstore, but when Ginny Weasley began to write in it, the diary wrote back. It listened, it comforted, and slowly it fed. The diary wasn't simply enchanted, it held a piece of Riddle's soul, a Horcrux. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry reads Ginny's final entry, written with desperate fear. "He's stronger than me now. I can't fight him anymore." Tom Riddle didn't just trap memories in ink, he planted a version of himself, waiting to take root. Through the diary, he possessed Ginny's mind, opened the chamber, and unleashed the basilisk. The artifact didn't need a master, it was one. But not all such objects are well known. There are whispers of the mirror of most dangerous desires, not to be confused with the mirror of Erist. This mirror shows not what you wish for, but what will drive you mad. Those who gaze into it see visions shaped by their fears, their weaknesses, their hidden rage. It's said the mirror can change its reflection depending on who approaches it, seeking not truth, but obsession. That's the nature of dark enchantment. It doesn't reveal, it controls. Dark artifacts don't need wands, they don't shout spells, they simply wait patiently, silently, until the person holding them forgets where the line is. Tom Riddle's diary didn't force Ginny to act, it made her want to. That's what makes such magic dangerous. It feels like your own thoughts, your own choices, and by the time you realize the artifact has a will of its own, it's too late. Number 15. Dark rituals almost always require a sacrifice. Dark rituals in the wizarding world are not just forbidden, they are costly. Unlike light magic, which often draws from emotion or will, dark rituals demand real sacrifice: blood, bone, flesh, memory, even fragments of the soul. These aren't just symbolic offerings, they are payments, and the magic doesn't work unless the price is paid. That's what sets the dark arts apart. Every gain comes with a loss. Every spell leaves something behind. The resurrection of Lord Voldemort is the most terrifying example. In Goblet of Fire, the ritual that returned him to power wasn't some abstract charm. It was a cold, calculated offering. Bone of the father unknowingly given, flesh of the servant willingly sacrificed, blood of the enemy forcibly taken. With these three elements, his father's remains, Peter Pettigrew's hand, and Harry's blood, Voldemort tore his way back into a body. Magic didn't create that moment. Suffering did. This is why dark rituals are rare. They don't just take objects, they take meaning. The bone wasn't just any bone, it was a trace of ancestry, the echo of a life Voldemort himself destroyed. The servant's flesh wasn't symbolic, it was a living hand, cut away in trembling loyalty. And the blood, taken from a boy whose mother died to protect him. That mixture doesn't just produce power, it creates debt. And dark magic always collects. What makes it worse is that you never truly know what you've lost. A piece of your soul, perhaps, a memory that won't return, a sliver of your own humanity. Voldemort became nearly invincible, yes, but in that moment he became less than human, his eyes red as fresh wounds, his voice high and cold. That ritual didn't only bring him back, it made sure there was no turning back. Number 16. Some potions can also be considered dark magic. In the shadowy halls of the Department of Mysteries, deep within the Ministry of Magic, lie the most feared secrets of the magical world. Yet not all darkness is hidden behind locked doors or spoken in Parseltongue. Some of it simmers quietly in cauldrons. Potions, often overlooked in discussions about the dark arts, are in fact among the most insidious weapons available to a witch or wizard. Unlike curses which require immediate and aggressive action, potions can lie dormant, subtle, waiting to unfold their effects with devastating precision. The art of potion making, while grounded in discipline and intellect, has long served as a mask for the darkest intentions. Consider the draught of living death, an innocent-sounding name for a brew capable of plunging a person into a sleep so deep it mimics death itself. This potion is not only real, it's one of the first that Professor Snape challenged his students to perfect. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Snape opens his first class by writing the name on the board, commanding a silent tension from the room. It's an academic exercise, but the implications are deeply unsettling. One drop administered without warning, and a victim may be mistaken for dead, buried, or forgotten, while their body slowly starves in darkness. The Ministry of Magic classifies it as a controlled substance, yet it is taught to sixth-year students. The line between education and weaponization blurs dangerously here. The nature of such potions lies in their dual identity. A poison can be a healer's tool in small doses, but the draught of living death was used during the First Wizarding War to simulate assassinations. Aurors discovered it administered in drinks left at crime scenes, often following the disappearance of an enemy or rival. The target was rendered unconscious, kidnapped and interrogated, while the world believed them dead. There is no wand trace, no signature hex, just silence, sleep and fear. This is what makes such potions terrifying. They erase the evidence of intent. In the cold cells of Azkaban, even before Dementors arrived to sap hope and memory, prisoners whispered of a different torment. Some spoke of potions slipped into meals, ones that clouded the mind and split it apart. While there is no public record, private testimonies from those freed after Voldemort's fall mention a brew concocted to induce hysteria and hallucinations. It wasn't a spell that drove them mad, it was a drink. According to former Auror Dawlish, a known witness to post-war interrogations, they'd give it to the new ones, it'd get in your head, and then you couldn't remember your name by morning. If such potions were real, and all signs point to their existence, they mark one of the cruelest manipulations of magic. Dementors feed on despair, but potions can plant that despair first. Even Polyjuice Potion, a staple of Hogwarts curriculum, deserves closer scrutiny. Its use by Harry, Ron and Hermione in the Chamber of Secrets was innocent enough, a means to gather information. But the recipe itself, described in Moste Potente Potions, is a recipe for deception. Brewed with forbidden ingredients like boomslang skin and bicorn horn, it allows complete transformation into another person. Used by Barty Crouch Jr. to impersonate Alastor Moody for an entire school year, this potion enabled the Death Eaters to infiltrate Hogwarts undetected. The betrayal wasn't magical, it was chemical. Polyjuice is not inherently evil, but in the wrong hands, it becomes the perfect instrument of subversion. One of the most chilling aspects of potion-based dark magic is how quietly it can be taught. Professor Snape, master of the subtle and sneering art, had long walked the line between brilliance and danger. He taught his students to handle ingredients like belladonna and valerian root, both known for their potent effects on the human nervous system. "I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even put a stopper in death," he once told a stunned first-year class, words that seemed theatrical at the time, but he meant every word. In those lessons, he was laying the foundation for understanding the dangerous chemistry of life and death. The Half-Blood Prince's annotated potions book, filled with improved instructions and sharp corrections, reveals how much more effective potions can become when wielded by someone with knowledge and disregard for safety. Sectum Sempra, while a curse, is found scribbled in the margins of that very book. So are alternative brewing techniques that make dark potions more potent, less detectable. One particular note suggests replacing powdered root of asphodel with essence of belladonna to increase sedation effects. Such substitutions move a potion from student exercise to weapon of war. Even Veritaserum, the so-called truth potion, toes the ethical edge. Described as the most powerful truth serum available, it's tightly restricted by the Ministry, yet Snape kept some in his private stores. Its use or misuse can reduce a person's autonomy, force confession, and manipulate justice. The Wizengamot officially prohibits its use in trials, as coercion under the influence of any substance is not legally binding. Yet it remains within reach of Hogwarts Potions Master. In a world where memories can be tampered with and trust is fragile, forcing truth through alchemy becomes a perilous moral compromise. The Amitentia potion, often marketed as the strongest love potion, is more sinister than sweet. While it does not create real love, only obsession, it has been used throughout magical history to manipulate, seduce, and even imprison victims. Merope Gaunt, Voldemort's mother, used a love potion to ensnare Tom Riddle Sr. The resulting relationship was not one of consent or affection, it was entrapment. When the potion wore off and Tom Riddle realized the truth, he fled. Merope was pregnant. The child she carried became the darkest sorcerer of the age. Thus, a love potion birthed a legacy of hatred. What could be more indicative of dark magic than a brew that steals someone's will? Number 17. Dark marks are not just symbols. The dark mark burned like fire on the inside of Antonin Dolohov's forearm the night Dumbledore died. Though he was far from the astronomy tower, lost in the shadows of a Muggle village in Yorkshire, the pain was instantaneous, raw, searing, alive. It wasn't merely a signal, it was a pull. He dropped his drink, his body turned of its own accord, and he disapparated before his mind had even caught up. The mark didn't just burn when Voldemort summoned, it commanded. The truth long buried beneath the fear and spectacle of the dark mark is that it was never simply a brand. For years the wizarding public has mistaken it for a sinister tattoo, a grotesque skull and serpent burned into the skin of Death Eaters as a badge of allegiance. But those who bore it knew better. It was living magic, ancient and binding, infused with enchantments that twisted the soul and manipulated the body. Voldemort, ever the student of forbidden knowledge, had not created it alone. He had resurrected it from a far older branch of magic, one almost lost to time, the runes of binding, known to some as the language of subjugation. Hidden in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, a fragment of parchment exists, copied from an older text believed to be destroyed by Ministry censors. On it, a diagram eerily similar to the Dark Mark is sketched in brown ink, along with annotations in Latin and Old Norse. It speaks of marcia scuggi, marks of shadow, used in northern Europe during the 12th century to enslave rogue giants. These marks bound the creature's will to the runes inscribed upon its skin. The resemblance is no coincidence. Voldemort, a master of drawing power from the past, would have known this history well. Snape once said "So the Dark Mark has grown clearer. It means the Dark Lord is gaining strength," but he never elaborated on what this change truly meant. Those close to the mark knew that its clarity, the way it grew darker, sharper, hotter, was not merely visual, it was visceral. Death Eaters reported not only pain, but dizziness, nausea, and even hallucinations when the Dark Lord was near or enraged. There are accounts from Yaxley's journal, seized post-war, describing a dreamlike trance that overtook him during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, compelling him to charge forward even as he wished to flee. "My limbs moved as if possessed," he wrote. "The mark burned me, but it also drowned my fear. There was no choice, only direction." Worse still, the mark tracked its bearers. Not through mundane means like magical GPS charms or enchanted coins, but through emotional resonance. Dumbledore suspected as much and once noted to McGonagall that Tom Riddle always liked his puppets on strings. The mark could detect hesitation. Regulus Black, the younger brother of Sirius, is believed to have attempted to flee the Dark Lord's service before ultimately turning against him. But the mark knew. Several Death Eaters confessed that Regulus's last few months were marked by frequent summons, always at night, always brutal. It was as though the mark had whispered his doubts into Voldemort's ear. Even after Voldemort's first fall, the mark remained a haunting presence. It faded, yes, but never vanished. It lay dormant like an ember, still pulsing faintly in the skin. Severus Snape, in one of his rare candid moments, referred to it as a scar that thinks. When Voldemort returned, the mark darkened once more, a cruel signal that his rise was no rumor. The mark had felt him. There are Auror reports confirming that multiple former Death Eaters woke screaming on the same night in June 1995, all clutching their arms, all certain the Dark Lord had returned. Magic that could bind across death and time, that was no ordinary sigil. But the Dark Mark wasn't the only example. Hidden deeper in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's archives is a sealed case file, Morgana's Hounds. In the 1700s, a dark cult operated in the hills of Transylvania, led by a warlock named Galban Radu. His followers bore a different mark, twisted wolf heads with green ink for eyes, that allowed him to command them across vast distances. Witnesses from the time wrote of howling men who responded to pain they alone could feel. The Romanian ministry eventually uncovered the rune magic involved, a variant of binding marks once used by Celtic warlords, modified with necromantic elements. The hounds became known for a strange trance-like obedience and were nearly impossible to interrogate, as the marks would trigger self-destruction upon betrayal. Such marks were outlawed by the International Confederation of Wizards after 1803, yet the knowledge lingered. Grindelwald himself reportedly explored the concept, though he never succeeded in implementing a system as effective as Voldemort's. A footnote in Percival Graves's confiscated journal references contagious runes of loyalty tested in Austrian strongholds, experiments that failed when several subjects died from internal magical hemorrhage. Voldemort, more precise and ruthless, succeeded where others had failed. His dark mark did not merely bind, it enslaved with finesse. Number 18. Some spells can alter a wizard's personality. The Cruciatus Curse was never meant to be a temporary act of violence. It was a transformation. Deep in the heart of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, rumors have long lingered about certain auras whose souls had grown brittle from the tools they once wielded only in desperation. "You've got to mean it," Bellatrix Lestrange once sneered in Order of the Phoenix when she demanded that Harry use the curse properly. But what most witches and wizards fail to understand is that meaning it isn't a simple matter of momentary rage, it's a gateway into a darker version of oneself, a reflection that gets harder to recognize with every use. Consider Bartemius Crouch Sr., a man once hailed as the beacon of justice in the First Wizarding War. He authorized the use of the unforgivable curses against Death Eaters, and while history framed it as a measure of necessity, those closest to him observed the shift. His house elf Winky, though loyal to the end, once confessed in fear that Master has changed since the war. It wasn't simply grief over his son or ambition that soured him. It was a soul damaged by fire wielded too often. He began treating even innocents with suspicion and cruelty until justice turned to obsession and righteousness into fanaticism. It was a slow erosion of empathy, like rain hollowing stone. Dark spells leave residue not only on the victim but on the caster. Dumbledore understood this. "You cannot sink into their methods, you cannot fight fire with fire," he warned. And yet there were those within the Ministry who felt otherwise. In the years following Voldemort's initial defeat, a number of auras were quietly retired, not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. Files locked in magical cabinets whispered of emotional instability, unprovoked aggression, and desensitization to suffering. They had grown too efficient with Cruciatus, too fluid with Imperius. Their victories on parchment hid the scars beneath their robes. What does it mean to lose yourself to a spell? When Amicus Carrow taught dark arts at Hogwarts under the Carrows regime, he did not simply instruct, it was spectacle. He forced students to use Cruciatus on one another, and for many the first time was horror, the second time a tremble, the third an obedient gesture. Neville Longbottom would later recall, "You learn to shut part of yourself off." That shutting off becomes the true curse. For Amicus, who once had a reputation for cowardice, the spell made him bold, but only in the way alcohol makes a man brave. Behind that bravery was rot. Dolores Umbridge never cast the unforgivable curses, but she understood their principles. Her use of a blood quill, a twisted form of enforced suffering, mimicked the psychological mechanism of dark magic, domination through control, pain as correction. Though never formally accused of using Imperius, her administrative reach behaved like it. Those under her command often spoke of a strange numbness, as if independent thought had dulled. The curse wasn't spoken aloud, but its essence had invaded her practice. It's no coincidence that the locket of Salazar Slytherin, a known dark artifact, did not affect her negatively when she wore it. She was already in sync with its cruelty. There was a case in the Aura archives, a young recruit named Tobias Vance. During a raid on a suspected Death Eater hideout, he was forced to use Imperius to control a guard and prevent bloodshed. He succeeded, he was promoted. Months later, he used the curse again on a thief who refused to surrender. By the end of the year, he'd used it 17 times, each documented, each necessary. But his colleagues noted something unsettling. He began referring to suspects as assets. He no longer used names. When a captured witch screamed under Cruciatus, he didn't flinch. "I'm saving lives," he said once. But who was he saving? In the end, Vance disappeared after an internal inquiry. Some say he left the country. Others whisper that he began working freelance, no longer for justice, but for contracts. The personality shift isn't dramatic, it's glacial. When Voldemort tortured people, he did it with a smile, but he wasn't born with that grin. In his youth, Tom Riddle already exhibited signs of emotional detachment, but the full transformation took years. Each act of cruelty, each use of dark magic stripped away another layer of his humanity. By the time he split his soul, his laugh was hollow. He wasn't merely evil, he was numb. Even love, especially love, was incomprehensible to him. Slughorn once said, "He's like a different person when he talks about certain things." That difference is the shadow left by curses. Harry Potter himself attempted Cruciatus, first against Bellatrix, then more successfully against Amicus Caro. The first time, it failed. The second, it worked. But Harry was visibly shaken afterward. He never bragged. He never used it again. That restraint saved him. He flirted with the edge, saw the abyss, and stepped back. His success in resisting the Imperius Curse was not just talent, it was willpower and moral grounding. But not everyone has that internal compass. The spell seduces. The power to command another person's will is addictive. The thrill of control whispers in the blood, louder each time. There was a healer at St. Mungo's who once treated curse victims. He claimed that some victims of Imperius, after prolonged exposure, develop depression, paranoia, and identity confusion. They lose sense of where their choices begin, he wrote in an unpublished paper. But what about the caster? What happens to the wizard who has repeatedly overridden another's mind? The healer noted that former Death Eaters often had flat affect, a clinical term for emotional blunting. They weren't remorseful, they were absent. A void had replaced their empathy. Number 19. Dark magic cannot simply be forgotten. There is a reason why even the bravest Aurors hesitate before uttering a single unforgivable curse. Once a wand has tasted the darkness, something shifts permanently. The air grows colder around it. The magic beneath the surface hums in a lower, darker register. There are whispers among the oldest members of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement that those who study the dark arts too closely do not return whole. Not broken, necessarily, but changed in a way that no amount of training or good intention can reverse. This isn't just myth. Alastor Moody, the legendary Auror known for capturing more dark wizards than any other in his generation, carried scars that ran deeper than his magical eye and his carved-up face. He often spoke of the cost of knowing too much about the enemy. His colleagues would mention, almost in hushed tones, the way he would stare into nothingness after long briefings, lost in memories of curses studied and spells deflected. Once, a young recruit asked him whether it was true that the Cruciatus curse could be blocked if one had enough willpower. Moody didn't respond immediately. Then he muttered, "You don't block it. You survive it if you're lucky. And even then, it never really leaves you." Dark magic leaves behind more than wounds. It stains. In the case of Auror Cassian Rookwood, an expert in the analysis of cursed artifacts, the stain became too literal. After years of handling items saturated with dark enchantments, cursed lockets, poisoned daggers, hexed mirrors, Cassian began having hallucinations. He reported seeing faces in the glass, hearing his name whispered from drawers that hadn't been opened in decades. Despite reassurances from St. Mungo's that he was suffering from stress-related magical fatigue, Rookwood vanished one night during a routine sweep of Nocturne Alley. All that was found was his wand, humming with residual magic, and a silver ring that hadn't been on his finger when he left the ministry. What happened to Cassian was not unique, nor was it unexpected. The department has long kept records, private, sealed, how exposure to dark magic affects even those who resist it. Auror Mariana Flint once reported that after weeks of studying a series of hand-copied pages from the original manuscripts of Herpo the Foul, she began to have vivid dreams. In them she stood over a sea of snakes, whispering, in a tongue she had never learned, but suddenly understood. She awoke speaking Parseltongue. Her family, horrified, insisted she resign. She did. No one knows where she went afterward. The truth is, once darkness has touched the mind, even briefly, it embeds itself like splinters under the skin. It can be ignored for a while, but eventually it festers. This is why even those who turned away from the dark arts, like Severus Snape, never fully returned to innocence. Despite his actions in the war, despite his loyalty to Dumbledore, despite his sacrifice, Snape carried with him the imprint of every curse he had ever cast. As he once said to Harry, "You have no idea what I have done." He did not speak with pride. He spoke with pain. The soul, wizards say, is delicate. This is why the creation of a Horcrux is considered the ultimate crime against nature. It tears the soul apart. But lesser acts of dark magic also cause fractures. Minor ones, perhaps, but cumulative. This is why even non-lethal curses can leave long-term effects on the caster. Auras trained in legilimency have described sensing a shadow in the minds of former Death Eaters. Not memories, not thoughts, a presence. As though the magic itself had taken root and grown into something sentient, feeding off the guilt and fear of its host. Even those who used dark spells for noble reasons were not spared. During the Second Wizarding War, a group of undercover operatives known only as the Black Shield infiltrated the inner circles of the Carrows to collect information on the torture and punishment of students at Hogwarts. One of them, a young man named Dorian Edgecombe, had to perform the Cruciatus curse on a fellow spy to maintain his cover. He claimed he felt nothing while doing it. But weeks later, when he returned to the Order, he suffered night terrors and violent mood swings. He died by suicide less than a year after the war ended. It is not simply guilt. It is not simply regret. It is as if the magic itself lingers inside the body, the mind, the very spirit. Aura Elise McTavish once described a feeling of cold silk slipping through my veins every time she walked past a room where someone had cast a killing curse. She hadn't cast it herself, but she had seen it done. She had studied its trajectory, its energy pattern, the shimmer of death as it bloomed, and it had followed her, unseen but tangible, ever since. There are those who argue that knowledge of the dark arts is necessary, that to defend against a threat one must understand it. Dumbledore himself said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." But what he did not say was that choices have consequences even when made for the right reasons. Dumbledore, too, once dabbled in dreams of power. He once believed, as Grindelwald did, that the greater good might justify terrible acts. He spent the rest of his life trying to make amends, but the fire that killed his sister was not the only mark left on him. The mind does not forget what it has done, nor what it has seen. Sirius Black, hardened by 12 years in Azkaban, warned Harry that if you want to know what a man's like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors. But he also said with haunted eyes that no one really escapes Azkaban. The Dementors did not feed on guilt alone. They fed on trauma, on dark thoughts, on the echoes of magic that clung to every prisoner. It is no coincidence that those imprisoned for the use of unforgivable curses often left Azkaban utterly broken, while those innocent, like Sirius, only barely held on to their sanity. Some curses resist even the strongest memory charms. The spell Obliviate, so often used to hide trauma, fails when the trauma is magical in nature. This was confirmed in a study by the Department of Magical Psychology in 2007, in which former Auras were asked to describe their experience with Obliviation therapy. Over half reported phantom memories returning during sleep. One described dreaming of blood he could not remember spilling. Another saw the faces of children who weren't in any records. One simply wrote, "I feel them watching me." Andromeda Tonks, once disowned by the Black family for marrying a Muggle-born, had trained briefly as a curse breaker in her youth. In private, she once told a healer that during one mission in Albania she had broken a seal on a temple etched with runes of blood magic. She swore she had heard her own name whispered from the shadows. She developed insomnia for 2 years. Even decades later, she refused to talk about it. "There are things that should never be named," she told a friend. "Once you name them, they remember you." This, perhaps, is the most disturbing truth about the dark arts. They are not passive. They are predatory. Magic, by its very nature, is neutral, but dark magic feeds. It desires usage, it craves memory. A spell cast in rage remembers that rage. A hex born of envy clings to that emotion, deepens it. This is why even seemingly harmless curses like the tongue-tying curse or the entrail-expelling hex have been classified as cognitively corrosive when studied long-term. They do not vanish when the caster repents, they wait. Bellatrix Lestrange was perhaps the most notorious example of what happens when a witch is consumed by dark magic. She was fanatical, yes, but more than that, she was hollow. Those who interrogated her after her capture in 1996 reported that she spoke in rhymes, laughed at invisible shapes, and referred to her wand as the voice in my veins. She was a cautionary tale, not of evil, but of surrender. She had long ceased to be a person. She was a vessel. The case of Marius Travers, a name not well known, was another. A hit wizard assigned to investigate blood rituals in the Balkans, he once succeeded in stopping a cult that was draining magic from infants. He also cast the killing curse on 6 wizards in one night. He received the Order of Merlin, 2nd class. He also disappeared 3 months later. His final letter to his sister read, "Every night they come back. Not the ones I saved, the ones I ended." There are few safeguards. The Ministry, wary of panic, rarely discloses the psychological toll that comes with confronting the dark arts. The Department of Mysteries has its own protocols, rooms where time is suspended, memories diluted, and emotions siphoned off like toxins. But these are only stopgaps. There is no true healing for some wounds. They remain, etched not in flesh but in magic itself. Some say this is why Voldemort was doomed from the beginning, not simply because he split his soul, but because he surrounded himself with echoes. Every curse he cast, every life he took, every spell uttered in hate, he became a mirror of them all. He no longer needed to choose darkness, he had become it. He once said, "There is no good and evil, there is only power." But power, when taken through darkness, exacts its price, always. In the end, the most tragic truth is this: no one touches the dark arts and walks away unchanged. Whether a Death Eater, a reluctant Auror, or a scholar bent on understanding forbidden knowledge, all who dance with shadows carry them forever. Not all are corrupted, not all fall, but none remain untouched. The shadow may fade, but it never disappears. Number 20. Muggles can suffer from dark magic even without knowing it. In a quiet village nestled on the outskirts of Sussex, an old mirror stood propped against the wall of an antique shop called Grimsby & Sons, its frame carved with intricate leaves and serpents. The shop had been owned for generations by a non-magical family, the Grimsbys, who prided themselves on gathering heirlooms from manors long forgotten. They never suspected that one such item, brought in by a wandering trader who vanished as swiftly as he appeared, would become the silent cause of a family's unravelling. The mirror sat unsold for nearly a year, until the Harcourts, a Muggle couple new to the village, purchased it on a sunny afternoon in June. They wanted a centrepiece for their hallway, and the glint of silver and gold under the dust had captivated them. What they didn't know was that this mirror had once belonged to a dark wizard named Mervyn Talcroft, an obscure figure even in the depths of magical archives. Talcroft had died over a century ago during a confrontation with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, but not before embedding his madness into objects scattered across the magical world. Within days of bringing the mirror home, things began to shift in the Harcourt household. First came the nightmares, unrelenting, vivid dreams that left the couple shaken and exhausted. Then odd behaviour followed. Mrs. Harcourt would misplace items only to find them moments later in places she swore she hadn't touched. Mr. Harcourt, once a gentle man, began to raise his voice for no reason at all. Their young son, Jamie, stopped speaking altogether. There were no signs of physical intrusion, no burglaries, no suspicious neighbours. Yet something had nested in the very air of their home, thickening like smoke no one could see. Cases like these are never made public. The Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes keeps detailed records under strict enchantment, records that even the Daily Prophet cannot access. One file, labelled Harcourt Residence Incident, contains a chilling assessment from an obliviator named Petra Flint. She noted a residual magical presence of Class 4 intensity, entwined with decaying traces of mental manipulation spells, likely cast in the last century. The mirror, she wrote, had become a vessel for what magical scholars call a psychic echo, a dark enchantment that does not attack but corrodes. It infiltrates slowly, often unnoticed, especially when the victims are muggles without any defense against it. What makes this kind of magic particularly insidious is its subtlety. Unlike the Cruciatus curse or the Killing curse, which produce instant visible results, these thin curses, known in old magical texts as mala levis, spread like mold in the mind. They don't scream, they whisper, and because muggles cannot recognize or resist such influence, they are the perfect targets. Magical historian Edgar Waffling once wrote, "The most dangerous curse is the one that feeds upon your sanity rather than your body, and for such enchantments, a muggle's mind is a banquet." In the Harcourt case, neighbours simply thought the family was going through a rough time. There were no signs of violence, just a quiet descent into fear, confusion, and isolation. When ministry agents finally intervened after detecting a surge of magic from the mirror that set off long-range alarms, they found the family in a near catatonic state. Jamie was hospitalized with what doctors called temporary psychogenic mutism. Mrs. Harcourt was heard whispering to the mirror for hours at a time. Mr. Harcourt had taken to sleeping in the garden, convinced the furniture in the house was rearranging itself at night. The mirror was confiscated, sealed in a cursed object vault in the Department of Mysteries. The family's memories were wiped clean. They were relocated under a false identity. But the scars, Petra Flint later said in her notes, run deeper than memory. One might ask, how often does this happen? The uncomfortable truth is more than the magical community is willing to admit. While the statute of secrecy is meant to protect both worlds, it also acts as a curtain. Behind it, cases like the Harcourts disappear into silence. In 1978, an entire block in Manchester was evacuated after a bewitched music box caused 13 residents to suffer from acute paranoia. The object was traced to a wizard named Constance Bellwether, who had vanished a decade earlier under suspicious circumstances. That box, like the mirror, had carried a piece of her essence, an emotional toxin buried under melody and nostalgia. The implications are terrifying. Muggles, by their very nature, cannot detect the tendrils of magic that slip through their lives. When a wizard sees a hexed object, the auras shimmer, spells leave footprints. But for a muggle, a cursed book is just a book. A bewitched doll is just a child's toy. They are blind in a house filled with invisible vipers. This is why the Department of Magical Artifacts now employs a special unit, the Muggle Surveillance Enchantment Division. Their task is to monitor Muggle marketplaces, antique auctions and estate sales. Yet even with such efforts, some objects slip through. There's an old tale whispered among unspeakables in the Department of Mysteries of a family in Austria who were all found drowned in their cellar. The only unusual object in the house was a grandfather clock, unworking and silent. Later, analysis revealed the gears had been infused with a compulsion charm and a slowly decaying, memory-altering jinx. They went down willingly, one agent said, but thought they were walking into the sun. How many such deaths have been quietly scrubbed from history? How many labelled as tragic accidents when in truth they were the final notes of a dark melody cast long ago? The magical world is filled with protections for its own, wards, charms, counter-curses, and trained minds. But muggles are vulnerable in a way wizards are not. Even the simple act of entering a magically compromised space can trigger latent curses. Professor Regulus Pietri, in his essay on the lingering malice of artifacts, wrote that Muggle blood offers no resistance. It absorbs enchantment like dry soil drinks poison. One wonders whether the real reason the Ministry hides these incidents is not to avoid panic, but to avoid blame. For some dark wizards, this is intentional. Curse smiths like Thaddeus Thrusk crafted items specifically for Muggle infiltration. His glass birds of sorrow looked like stained glass decorations, but emitted low-frequency magical vibrations that destabilized emotional regulation in anyone nearby. In 1894, 5 people were institutionalized in Wales after purchasing one of these birds at a fair. No one knew the real cause until decades later, when a member of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures stumbled upon a reference in Thrusk's grimoire, now held under lock in the restricted section of the Hogwarts Library. And yet, there is almost no discussion of these realities in Hogwarts curriculum. Students are taught the theory of dark magic, the horror of unforgivable curses, the ethics of spellcasting, but the silent suffering of Muggles remains an off-page tragedy. Even in defensive magical theory, Wilbert Slinkard focuses on magical threats to magical people. Nowhere is there a chapter titled The Muggle Victims. No one tells the students that a simple object, misplaced and forgotten, can destroy a family without casting a single visible spell. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of these thin curses is their ability to adapt. Some magical researchers now suspect that certain enchanted objects evolve over time, feeding on emotion, learning patterns, shifting focus. The mirror in the Harcourt house had not shown activity for decades, and yet the moment it was moved, it awakened. There is a theory recorded by researcher Alma Drever in The Shifting Intellect of Residual Magic that objects infused with dark enchantments are semi-sentient, motivated not by intent, but by residue, a hunger born from the wizard who made them. Alma recounts a case from 1922 in which a pocket watch, stolen from a deceased wizard, slowly drove its new Muggle owner to insomnia and eventual suicide. The object did not desire his death, she wrote, but it responded to grief and loneliness like a seed does to water. This observation aligns with a terrifying pattern. The most powerful cursed objects seem to react to pain, amplifying it, and Muggles, with no ability to shield themselves, are ideal sources. The wizarding community must confront this fact. While it is easy to dismiss the Muggle world as separate, it is in fact deeply intertwined with magical debris. Every wand broken, every ritual abandoned, every curse unfinished, these fragments drift. And when they settle in a non-magical household, they take root in silence. As Dumbledore once warned, dark times lie ahead of us, and there will be a time when we must choose between what is easy and what is right. Is it right to let Muggles suffer simply because they cannot see? There are whispers that even some members of the Wizengamot have argued for broader transparency. A proposal once reached the High Table suggesting cooperation with select Muggle scientists to detect magical resonance. It was quickly silenced. The risk, they said, was too great. But the silence, too, is a risk. The longer the magical world ignores these quiet tragedies, the more they pile up in forgotten corners of Muggle life, marked not by wands or spells, but by pain and madness unexplained. Even the cursed object registries remain incomplete. Many items vanish during war, migration, or theft. Some lie at the bottom of lakes, buried in attics, or displayed in museums. In one chilling case, a vase believed to be haunted was featured in a London art exhibit, causing several visitors to faint over the course of a week. The curator dismissed it as overactive imagination. A visiting wizard from the Bulgarian embassy recognized the vase and quietly reported it. The object had belonged to a dark seer who believed beauty could be weaponized. The vase is now in a Department of Mysteries vault, but the memories of those who touched it remain fractured. In the end, it is not the explosions or curses shouted in rage that are the most dangerous. It is the slow unraveling, the invisible touch, a cracked mirror, a music box, a clock. These are the tools of a darkness that understands patience. And for Muggles, the greatest danger is not being targeted, but being forgotten. For even if the curse passes, the pain often remains. And no memory charm can truly erase a wound the soul remembers. Number 21. Some ancient families mastered darkness as an art. The Black Family Library was a legend in itself, not because it was vast, but because it was dangerous. Hidden behind thick velvet curtains in a drawing room few dared to enter, the shelves sagged under the weight of books bound in human skin, enchanted to whisper secrets to those bold enough to listen. While Burga Black, matriarch of the Pure Blood dynasty, had once hissed that even Dumbledore would have hesitated before reaching for a volume from the highest shelf. Too dark for the restricted section, Sirius had once muttered with a mixture of pride and shame when describing it to Harry. These books were not instructional manuals, they were legacies. Bellatrix Lestrange, née Black, had never read those tomes in the usual sense. She had absorbed them. From the moment she could walk, she had been surrounded by a world where dark magic was not whispered about in fear, but spoken with reverence, taught like poetry, revered like history. Curses were lullabies, rituals were afternoon lessons. She didn't need to look up the Cruciatus Curse when she performed it on Neville Longbottom's parents. Her voice rang with certainty, not because she practiced it, she lived it. Her childhood had been a classroom without mercy, a place where the line between instruction and indoctrination blurred into smoke. The Gaunts, descendants of Salazar Slytherin himself, carried the shadow of Parseltongue like a blood mark. Morfin Gaunt spoke to snakes with the same fluency with which he cursed Muggles. In their dilapidated shack, behind rotting curtains and crumbling walls, lay a different kind of inheritance. Their magic wasn't written in elegant calligraphy. It was scratched into wood, carved into stone, passed through madness. Merop Gaunt, Voldemort's mother, had been the weakest among them, yet even she possessed an instinctive affinity for controlling others, manipulating emotions through a potion that seduced Tom Riddle Sr. She may not have wielded her family's cruelty, but the shadow of their magic pulsed in her veins. It was ancestral, inevitable. The Rosiers never flaunted their power. They didn't need to. They moved like shadows in ministry halls and whispered in the ears of the influential. Evan Rosier, a Death Eater lost in the First War, had known spells that burned through Auror defenses like paper. Alastair Moody had taken out part of his face while capturing him, a cost that spoke volumes about Rosier's level of threat. He was not taught those spells at Hogwarts. No curriculum included curses that left victims screaming blood. That knowledge was family-bound, passed during quiet dinners beneath the flickering light of black candles, where children learned the art of fear before they learned arithmetic. These families did not consider the dark arts forbidden. They saw them as higher disciplines. Where others saw danger, they saw legacy. The term dark arts itself was a misnomer in their eyes. There was only power, and those too weak to grasp it were the ones who called it evil. In a sense, they were connoisseurs, collectors of spells and practices too refined, too volatile, too impure for public knowledge. Their homes were museums of ancient relics, daggers that whispered, masks that bled, portraits that screamed warnings in forgotten tongues. They did not practice magic. They inherited it, like blue-blooded painters inherit their palettes. The Black family tapestry, faded and scorched in places, served not merely to trace lineage but to signal magical inheritance. One could follow the branches and spot the affinity for darkness blooming like poisoned roses. Regulus Arcturus Black, despite his youth, found himself seduced by the same call that drew his cousin Bellatrix. The call was not Voldemort's alone, it was deeper, older. The Blacks were raised to feel that the world owed them reverence, because their magic was ancient, their blood pure, their knowledge dangerous. Regulus's betrayal of Voldemort was not a rejection of darkness, but a correction of its misuse. Magic is might, the Ministry once declared under Death Eater control, but for the ancient families that slogan was redundant. They had always believed it. Darkness to them was not an aberration, but the most potent form of expression. They wore it like velvet, with grace and poise, never flinching at the curses they cast. Narcissa Malfoy, another scion of the Blacks, never branded herself a Death Eater, but her magic held weight. When she lied to Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, it wasn't bravery that saved Harry, it was heritage. She had grown up around danger, trained in the art of control, deception, and strategy. At Hogwarts, dark spells were studied theoretically, defensive spells were praised, and the unforgivables were strictly forbidden. But in the drawing rooms of ancient houses there were no such rules. Children were not taught to fear a curse, they were taught to perfect it. The moment a black child showed interest in magic, they were handed a wand and a warning: you are not like them, you are stronger. This indoctrination made them dangerous, not because they were evil, but because they were skilled and convinced of their superiority. They didn't stumble into the dark arts, they were born steeped in them. In Grimmauld Place, even after years of disuse, the very air crackled with residual enchantments. Curtains twitched on their own. The staircase groaned with voices only certain blood could hear. Sirius had tried to escape, but the house had clung to him, as if it could not forgive his betrayal. Every room was layered with spells meant to defend, harm, or manipulate. Even Kreacher, the house elf, was a product of this dark legacy. He revered the old ways not out of affection, but out of conditioning. The magic had soaked into his bones, making him a living symbol of inherited darkness. Not all who came from these families turned to Voldemort, but those who didn't were still shaped by the atmosphere of magical absolutism. Andromeda Black, who married a Muggle-born and was disowned, did not lack magical prowess, she simply rejected the ideology. Yet even she carried the calm certainty of one who knew the weight of her own power. There was no trembling hesitation in her spells. That grace under pressure was a mark of her upbringing. The difference was not in strength, but in morality, a lesson that Hogwarts alone could never teach. Tom Riddle's obsession with blood purity wasn't just ideology, it was strategy. He knew that to court the ancient families was to court reservoirs of dark magic untapped by even the most studious Hogwarts graduates. The Gaunts, the Blacks, the Rosiers, they didn't serve him blindly. They served out of alignment. He spoke their language. He admired their relics. His admiration wasn't flattery, it was recognition. His own heritage as a Gaunt through his mother gave him access to ancestral enchantments far beyond the reach of his orphan origins. His darkness was learned, but it had roots. The Lestranges had vaults in Gringotts that were not only guarded by goblin contracts but by curses so old that even the goblins feared them. It was in one of those vaults that Helga Hufflepuff's cup was hidden, but the more terrifying reality was the enchantments protecting it. The idea that the cup remained untouched for so long was not only due to Voldemort's spells, it was also the lingering protections left by generations of Lestranges who never questioned what needed to be hidden, only how best to hide it. Darkness was their craft, and secrecy was their second skin. When Bellatrix fought in the Department of Mysteries, it wasn't just rage or loyalty that guided her wand, it was precision. She didn't scream spells at random, she moved with elegance, a duelist bred rather than trained. "He will not be back from me," she shrieked when taunted by Harry, but even her madness had discipline. Her curse that killed Sirius was not just a weapon, it was a culmination of blood and belief, refined and unrepentant. She didn't cast a killing curse, she cast a truth. Only the strong survive, and she had been raised to be the strongest. The Slytherin Common Room, located under the lake, was designed to feel like a noble crypt, and for good reason. Students from the old families felt at home there, not because it was cold, but because it echoed with age. Ancient lineages felt the weight of history, and the darkness that surrounded them was familiar, almost comforting. The The flicker of green light, the hum of the water above, the stone walls, these were not warnings but affirmations. The House of Slytherin didn't breed dark wizards. It attracted those already shaped by ancestral darkness. Even the Ministry, for all its proclamations, tread lightly around these families. When Sirius Black was imprisoned without a trial, it wasn't just about fear, it was also about avoiding the wrath of a name that echoed with both respect and dread. The Black family had roots in almost every magical institution, relatives in the Wizengamot, cousins in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, allies in high places. To accuse one was to touch the web. And the web fought back, in whispers and hexes, in favours and threats. Darkness was power, and power demanded caution. During the Second Wizarding War, the Order of the Phoenix feared the Death Eaters not only for their cause, but for their pedigree. Fighting a Rosier or a Lestrange was not like duelling an average dark wizard. It was like stepping into a legacy of war. Every move, every curse had history behind it. These were not rebels. They were inheritors of an old order that saw itself as rightful rulers. Their magic was not improvisation, it was art. To face them was to face centuries of curated cruelty. Even within the halls of Hogwarts, remnants of this philosophy lingered. Certain portraits looked longer at students bearing familiar surnames. Certain suits of armor bowed slightly when a Black or a Rosier walked by. Magic, especially ancient magic, remembered. It carried names like echoes in the stone, and the echoes favored those who had always known how to listen. This was the unseen power, the kind that left no trail but shaped every hallway. Darkness, to the old families, was more than magic. It was memory. The dark arts were feared because they corrupted, but the families who mastered them saw that corruption as refinement. Just as a sculptor sacrifices stone to create beauty, they believed pain could create power. They saw the unforgivable curses not as tools of violence, but as rites of passage. The killing curse was not horror, it was conclusion. The Imperius curse was not theft, it was dominion. The Cruciatus curse was not torture, it was expression. To the rest of the world, these spells were lines never to be crossed. To the ancient families, they were signatures. And so the truth remains, hidden beneath the rubble of wars and the ashes of banners. Some families did not learn the dark arts. They were the dark arts. They lived it, inherited it, and passed it on like a crown. They were not evil in their own eyes, they were elite. And that perhaps is what made them most terrifying. Not because they wished to destroy the world, but because they believed they had the right to shape it. Number 22, magical laws against dark arts don't always work. The Ministry of Magic has always claimed to stand as the final bulwark against the rise of the dark arts. Its laws, etched into parchment and reinforced by the presence of auras, suggest a society where cruelty can be held in check by decree. But history tells another story, a shadowed tale woven through loopholes, fear, and necessity. Magical laws against dark magic, it seems, are only as strong as the will to enforce them. And often, that will bends. During the Second Wizarding War, auras, those supposedly righteous enforcers of magical justice, were granted liberties that blurred the lines between justice and vengeance. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Nymphadora Tonks and others within the Order of the Phoenix were celebrated for their courage, but even they were not untouched by the darkness they opposed. It was Alastor Moody, long before his tragic impersonation, who first hinted at the hypocrisy. "You've got to know the dark to fight it," he would growl, and his own methods left little doubt that he practiced what he preached. The Ministry's secret sanctioning of the Cruciatus curse against Death Eaters was not just rumour, it was quiet policy. Dolores Umbridge, despite her grotesque personality and corruption, was never disciplined for the quill that carved blood into the hands of schoolchildren. The reason? She operated under the guise of legal authority. The Ministry had, after all, provided her the platform. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Hermione notes bitterly, she's using the law to do the things the Death Eaters did openly. Here, then, lies the dark irony. Laws are no barrier when those in power decide to bypass them. The law, in such cases, does not protect, it enables. Even before Voldemort's rise, the cracks were visible. In the Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Sr., as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, sentenced several people to Azkaban without trials. This included Sirius Black, who never received the opportunity to defend himself. Crouch's paranoia and obsession with order became the very instruments of injustice. The legal system, instead of preventing the dark arts, replicated its fear and control through official channels. And then there are the unforgivable curses themselves, the Cruciatus, the Imperius, and the Killing Curse. Declared illegal, punishable by a sentence in Azkaban, they are nonetheless taught in classrooms under the pretense of awareness. Mad-Eye Moody, or rather Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, performed each of these curses on classroom creatures in the Goblet of Fire with the justification of education. No student, not even Hermione, reported him. The implication was chilling. Awareness of the dark arts came with a silent endorsement of their use under certain conditions. Knowledge, once acquired, cannot be unlearned. The same can be said of magical artifacts created with intent to harm. Tom Riddle's diary is a haunting example. When Ginny Weasley stumbled upon the small black-bound book in her first year, no one in Hogwarts, not even Dumbledore, suspected that such a mundane object could become a weapon of possession. The diary operated in secrecy, whispering into Ginny's thoughts, coercing her into reopening the Chamber of Secrets. The artifact was not illegal. How could it be when no one knew it existed? The law had no name for such evil. Regulations cannot anticipate every horror. The Vanishing Cabinet, a relatively harmless item in itself, became a portal for Death Eaters in The Half-Blood Prince. When Draco Malfoy repaired the broken cabinet, he created a doorway into Hogwarts, one that allowed Bellatrix Lestrange and Fenrir Greyback to infiltrate its hallowed halls. There was no legislation against using vanishing cabinets this way. Why would there be? The cabinet was not the weapon. The intent was, and the law was never designed to detect intent. Dumbledore understood this failure well. As headmaster, he repeatedly stressed the importance of personal choice. In the Chamber of Secrets, he tells Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." This was not a platitude, it was a recognition that rules do not govern morality, people do. No amount of ministry interference could prevent a cursed necklace from being passed into the school or a poisoned bottle of mead from nearly killing Ron Weasley. Knowledge and caution were the only defences. The Room of Requirement, meant to assist those in need, was another tool subverted by dark intentions. In The Half-Blood Prince, Draco uses the room to hide and fix the Vanishing Cabinet. Previously, Dumbledore's army had used it for resistance training. The room itself was neutral. Its danger came from the hands that shaped it. There was no registry of such a space, no inspection or legal barrier. The law did not know how to see the room, much less regulate it. Horcruxes, the darkest magical invention of them all, existed outside the scope of law, not because the Ministry condoned them, but because it didn't fully understand them. Only Dumbledore, through painful research and memory collection, managed to unearth Voldemort's terrible secret. Slughorn, who taught Horace Riddle about soul-splitting, never faced consequence. The knowledge itself was too obscure to ban, too shadowed by fear to pursue. What good were magical laws then when the very foundations of certain evils remained unnamed? Even during the First Wizarding War, the Ministry's blindness was evident. Peter Pettigrew received the Order of Merlin for bravery while hiding the truth of his betrayal. He lived as a rat in the Weasley household for years, completely undetected by the supposed protectors of the realm. His animagus transformation was unregistered, illegal, and dangerous, but without knowledge the law was powerless. Sirius Black, the innocent man, suffered, while Pettigrew lived freely under the Ministry's nose. The existence of secret societies like the Death Eaters further proved the system's flaws. Their marks, branded into their arms, were visible only when Voldemort called. No spell revealed them. No truth serum exposed their alliances unless administered by someone with the courage to ask. In The Half-Blood Prince, Snape's double life was balanced on this very blade of secrecy. The Ministry never truly knew who stood on which side. Its justice, therefore, was a game of chance. Even Azkaban, the ultimate punishment for dark practitioners, was flawed. Guarded by Dementors, it relied on despair as a form of containment. Yet Sirius escaped it without a wand. Barty Crouch Jr. escaped by using Polyjuice Potion, aided by his mother. The illusion of safety fell apart with simple determination. When the Dementors ultimately joined Voldemort, the Ministry's illusion of control crumbled entirely. Darkness cannot be contained by creatures of darkness. In the broader wizarding world, the existence of cursed objects, blood wards, and inherited magical protections further complicated legality. The locket of Slytherin passed from person to person, seeding corruption with every owner. The trace, meant to monitor underage magic, failed to prevent Harry from being cursed by Dementors in Order of the Phoenix. Dobby's accidental magic triggered it instead. The Ministry punished without knowing the truth because it relied on assumptions, not understanding. The magical world has always depended on secrecy to survive, yet secrecy also fosters vulnerability. The Forbidden Forest contains creatures of unregulated power, acromantulas, centaurs, and worse. In the Philosopher's Stone, Harry nearly died at the hands of a possessed Professor Quirrell in that forest. No law protected him, only a unicorn's blood and a centaur's mercy. There was no patrol, no monitoring. The Ministry never even knew. In many ways, Hogwarts itself was the strongest example of this contradiction. A school meant to educate young minds, it regularly failed to protect them. Basilisks slithered beneath its foundations, Dementors patrolled its borders, and secret passages riddled its walls. Dumbledore's protections were magical, not legal. The law had no jurisdiction over the ghosts, the moving staircases, or Peeves, the poltergeist. Discipline was enforced by tradition, not legislation. When danger struck, it was knowledge, bravery, and trust, not regulation, that saved lives. Hermione Granger, always a believer in rule-following, learned this lesson harshly. When she used a time turner in The Prisoner of Azkaban, it was Ministry-approved and tightly restricted, yet with it, she broke the very fabric of time to save Buckbeak and Sirius. Legal? No, just absolutely. The law forbade what morality demanded. The story of the dark arts is not just one of forbidden spells, but of the illusion that rules can govern fear. The truth is harsher. Fear adapts. It flows into gaps between paragraphs of law, seeps into loopholes, and grows where understanding falters. The only real defense, Dumbledore always believed, was knowledge. The truth, he once said in The Goblet of Fire, is a beautiful and terrible thing and should therefore be treated with great caution. But caution is not prohibition, it is preparation. The failure of magical law lies in its assumption that evil is predictable, but evil, especially in the magical world, is clever. It hides in books, in intentions, in old heirlooms and unlabeled potions. It manipulates the very idea of justice. The Imperius Curse does not just control bodies, it controls reputations, memories, choices. How does one regulate a world where a person's will can be stolen? In the end, the lesson remains. Banning something does not make it disappear. The forbidden section of the library still stands. Tom Riddle's diary still exists. The room of hidden things is still full. The laws may forbid, but they do not cleanse. They conceal, they forget, and the dark arts do not care about parchment. They care only about those who are unprepared. So long as knowledge remains scattered and fear is mistaken for control, the dark arts will always find a way in, not because the laws are absent, but because the laws cannot see. Only the vigilant, the informed, and the brave stand a chance, and even then, it is never enough to rely on rules. One must rely on readiness. Number 23. Not all dark wizards were evil. Dark magic. The words themselves send a chill through the spine of even the most seasoned witches and wizards. But within the shadows, not all is evil. To understand this, one must venture beyond the myths, the fears, and the ministry-approved versions of history. There are names buried in the forgotten chapters of magical scholarship, names like Edrian Arcturus Flynn. While the world remembers the notorious dark wizards, Riddle, Grindelwald, and others whose ambitions left marks of blood, it forgets those who dared to wield the same forces for a purpose that defied cruelty. Dark magic, like fire, destroys but also illuminates. What we fear, we often misunderstand. In the late 19th century, Edrian Flynn was a rising star among magical mediwizards. Educated at Castellobrusso, he later moved to London, joining St Mungo's as a trauma specialist. His brilliance was unquestionable, but it was his methods that stirred murmurs in the corridors of power. At a time when magical anesthetics were rudimentary at best, Flynn began experimenting with the Imperious Curse, a spell classified as one of the unforgivables, not for control, but for healing. Panic, fear, and shock often killed patients before any spell or potion could reach their bloodstream. Flynn's solution was controversial. If a patient was about to die of trauma-induced hysteria, why not use Imperious to calm them? In Flynn's journals, sealed in the restricted section of the Hogwarts Library until the 1980s, he wrote, "I did not steal their will, I gave them peace when their own minds betrayed them." One patient, a young witch named Clara Nettleby, had been burned in a fireplace explosion. Her skin was charred, her voice lost to smoke. He cast the Imperious Curse on her moments before operating. It stabilized her heartbeat. Her muscles, previously in spasm, relaxed. The surgery, a spell-weaving procedure to regenerate tissue, succeeded. She lived. And she testified for Flynn when the Magical Medical Society tried him for misconduct. But the court had no room for grey morality. The use of any unforgivable, regardless of context, was grounds for permanent expulsion. Edrian Arcturus Flynn, once praised as the healer of flame, was exiled from every medical institution in the wizarding world. He disappeared from public records, his research seized. But his story did not end there. 2 decades later, in the 1910s, his techniques were quietly adopted by the early Auror Corps. While the official training manuals never credited Flynn, internal memos preserved in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement archives show clear reference to calm state manipulation, a euphemism for controlled Imperious deployment in high-risk detainment. In one memo dated March 3, 1919, an Auror named Gideon McCallum wrote, "The method." Advised by Flynn, yes, that Flynn, has proved invaluable in capturing Gurg Bloodjaw of the Highlands without a single civilian injury. Here lies the paradox of dark magic. A spell does not wear a mask of good or evil. It is cast by hands, human, fallible, moral, or immoral. What then defines darkness? Is it the intensity of the spell, the cost it exacts from the caster? Or is it the intent, the heart beating beneath the wand? If Edrian Flynn used the Imperious to prevent suffering, does he belong in the same category as a Death Eater? In the Tales of Beedle the Bard, Dumbledore comments on the nature of magic in his footnotes. There is no spell so dark it cannot be repurposed by a pure heart, and no charm so innocent it cannot be used to kill. This sentiment, dismissed by many as poetic idealism, aligns perfectly with Flynn's approach. He did not flinch from the darkness, he retooled it. Yet his legacy is not a solitary anomaly. In 1836, a Hungarian war wizard named Arpad Elek used necromancy, another class of taboo magic, to commune with the spirits of soldiers killed in a goblin uprising near Miskolc. His goal was not to raise the dead, but to locate a cursed cavern where survivors had vanished. His critics howled, calling it grave desecration. But he found them, 7 wizards buried alive and hexed. Into silence, every one of them lived. Elek, like Flynn, was stripped of his honours. These stories echo through time like ghostly echoes in an old chamber. In every era, magic bends to the will of those who wield it. Even in the Harry Potter saga, we see Dumbledore himself using magic that skirted the moral edge. He believed in the greater good once, and though he later rejected that path, it is undeniable that his vast arsenal included knowledge of the dark arts. His ability to duel Grindelwald in 1945 was not due solely to his mastery of transfiguration or charms. He understood his enemy's tools. He'd studied them. And what of Severus Snape, a name cursed and sanctified all at once? Snape brewed potions that could poison a centaur in seconds. He invented curses like Sectum Sempra. Yet his darkness served a light so blinding it burned away his sins in the minds of many. Harry himself in Deathly Hallows comes to a painful realization. He was on our side despite everything. Snape is the clearest canonical example of the paradox, a dark arts master driven by love, betrayal, and purpose. When Hermione Granger expressed horror at the very mention of dark magic, Sirius Black countered her in Order of the Phoenix with clarity. The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. That sentence, raw and piercing, speaks to the heart of our inquiry. Not every spell labelled dark is fueled by hatred. Not every wizard who casts it is lost. In 1892, the French witch Lisette Durand developed a ritual classified under forbidden convergence. It allowed for the partial transfer of magical stamina from a caster to a victim suffering from magical exhaustion. The ritual was based on principles extracted from ancient Druidic blood rites, the same rituals once labelled as darkest practice in the 13th century ban of Dunmharu. Durand's ritual was used in plague wards. Throughout rural Provence, children recovered. Parents called her a saviour. The French ministry called her a criminal. It is easy to see how fear reshapes history. The Ministry of Magic, cautious and bureaucratic, defined dark arts not by effect alone, but by intention, then doubted anyone's ability to wield dark spells with pure intent. The trio of unforgivables, the Killing Curse, the Cruciatus Curse, the Imperious Curse, is not listed as unforgivable because evil, but rather because they demand a particular act of soul, to kill, to torture, to control. But what of a spell like Sectum Sempra, which simply causes slashing wounds? It is not classified as an unforgivable. Yet it was created by a student and nearly killed Draco Malfoy. So we arrive again at the paradox. The law of magic does not always align with the morality of its use. If the law bans what it fears, then many healers, explorers, and pioneers will always tread that border in silence, in exile, in forgotten journals. Flim, Elec, Durand, none of them bear statues in Diagon Alley. Yet their hands, darkened by cursed light, healed those others turned away from. And if one thinks these ethical debates are relics of old, consider that even in Harry's time, ministry propaganda discouraged the study of certain magics altogether. In Half-Blood Prince, we see students forbidden from accessing the restricted section without written permission. And even then, certain books had pages removed. Knowledge itself becomes dangerous. But to stifle learning is not the same as preventing harm. It merely ensures that when dark magic is encountered, those facing it are unprepared. It was Grindelwald who famously said, "Magic blooms only in rare souls." His meaning twisted this into justification for tyranny. But what if, stripped of ambition, the phrase reminds us that understanding, true understanding, is rarer still? Few seek to explore what they fear. Fewer still do so for the sake of others. Harry Potter's victory over Voldemort did not come from simply refusing to use dark magic. It came from understanding it, from resisting it when offered, from recognizing that power is never neutral. But the hand that wields it makes it so. And when Harry chose to use Expelliarmus instead of Avada Kedavra, it was not because the latter was inherently more powerful. It was because Harry knew who he was. and power, once rooted in identity, reveals truth. Still, how many other Edrian Flims remain erased? Their names smudged from textbooks, their spells archived and forgotten, their lives reduced to footnotes. In a world where history is often written by survivors and policy by those in fear, the line between heretic and hero is perilously thin. In the Department of Mysteries, where time, death, love, and thought are studied as phenomena beyond laws and politics, there is, supposedly, a sealed wing known as the Grey Chamber. No official has ever confirmed its contents, but whispers speak of experiments in moral paradox, of spells neither white nor black. If such a place exists, perhaps it is the only place where the likes of Flim would be honoured, studied, not silenced. Magic, in the end, reflects its caster. A dark spell cast to save a life is no darker than a light spell used in cruelty. Our obsession with labelling things, and this is light, this is dark, may soothe public conscience, but it often erases truth, and the truth is rarely clean. The next time one hears of the Unforgivables, perhaps remember Clara Nettleby, who grew old telling her grandchildren that a bad spell saved her life, or the Auras who caught Bloodjaw without violence, or the boy named Harry, who stood before the darkest wizard of the age, armed with nothing but resolve, and won. Not because he cast no shadows, but because he knew which ones to walk through. And somewhere, in a box sealed with ancient charms, Edrian Flim's wand lies beside his journals, waiting perhaps for someone brave enough not to fear the dark, but to understand it. Number 24. Some spells cannot be learned without inner darkness. The Cruciatus Curse did not fail because the wand was wrong or the incantation flawed. It failed because Harry, in that moment of rage in the Department of Mysteries, did not truly wish to cause pain. "You have to mean it," Bellatrix had told him, her voice laced with a wicked satisfaction. And she was right. This was not the kind of magic that responded to rote gestures or practiced syllables. The unforgivable curses, particularly the Cruciatus, required something far more sinister than skill. They demanded darkness. Not the performative kind, but a rotting seed of malice nestled within the soul. The dark arts were never meant to be democratic. They were not designed for classrooms or textbooks, not built for revision cards or dueling clubs. They were primal, instinctive, and in many cases required something raw and volatile inside the caster. No matter how often Professor Snape instructed students to repeat Sectum Sempra, none could reproduce the horrifying effect it had when he first invented it, not without understanding the unspoken anger with which it was born. This was not a spell passed down, it was an emotional inheritance, and it asked for more than a steady hand, it asked for blood. Even Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, could not bring herself to cast the Cruciatus Curse effectively. She had memorized the words, she had studied the wand movements, but her soul rejected the impulse. The idea of inflicting agony was a betrayal of everything she stood for. The moment she attempted it, her magic wavered, not because she lacked knowledge, but because she lacked the necessary internal fracture. The dark arts demand not mere ambition, but rupture. Compare her to Bellatrix Lestrange. For Bellatrix, pain was a language and she was fluent. She did not merely cast the Cruciatus Curse, she relished it. Her magic slithered like oil over fire, powered not by academic brilliance, but by a deranged love for cruelty. "Never used an unforgivable curse before, have you, boy?" she had mocked Harry. Because she knew. She knew the difference between reciting pain and meaning it. Magic, at its most lethal, is emotional. The wand becomes a conductor not of incantations, but of soul. The dark arts are often described as corrupting, but this is imprecise. They do not change a person, they amplify what already exists. Tom Riddle didn't become Lord Voldemort because he cast the dark arts. He cast the dark arts because he was already Voldemort in spirit. His capacity for cruelty preceded his command of magic. even as a child at the orphanage, long before he could say Avada Kedavra. He had already learned how to manipulate and destroy. The magic came later. The malevolence was first. And that is the most chilling truth. Dark magic responds to intent, not syllables. A wizard could memorize every curse in existence and remain impotent if his heart wasn't aligned with the spell's hunger. For example, Regulus Black, though raised in a pureblood family, never truly sank into the same depths as his cousin Bellatrix. When he tried to harness magic for darker purposes, it was always tinged with hesitation. His eventual betrayal of Voldemort wasn't a change of heart, it was a revealing of one. He lacked the appetite for destruction. Dark spells need more than obedience, they crave belief. Snape, however, is a paradox. He mastered the dark arts but was not consumed by them. How? Because his bitterness was vast, but so was his capacity for restraint. He understood pain, and he wielded it surgically. But his truest spells, those he created, those he reserved, were never for vanity or power. They were, in some twisted way, acts of control. Snape's darkness was not indulgent like Bellatrix's, but functional. He knew how to hate, but also how to stop. This distinction kept him from spiraling into the abyss. Then there is Draco Malfoy, who fancied himself capable of terrible things, but whose magic repeatedly faltered. In Half-Blood Prince, his assignment to assassinate Dumbledore became a slow unraveling. The dark object he repaired, the vanishing cabinet, worked. The spells he attempted did not. Even when he cornered Dumbledore atop the astronomy tower, his hand trembled. Because deep within, Draco was not cruel. Arrogant, prejudiced, fearful, yes, but not cruel. The wand hesitates when the heart is uncertain. Consider also the Carrows, Alecto and Amycus. Their reign at Hogwarts was marked by routine punishment, torture and humiliation, but their cruelty was different. It was not elevated, not poetic. It was vulgar. They did not possess the charisma of Voldemort or the fanaticism of Bellatrix. Their spells lacked finesse. They cast curses like drunks throw punches, messy, imprecise, but fueled by something undeniably vicious. The Carrows were not skilled in the dark arts so much as they were permitted by them. They proved that the spells don't demand brilliance. They demand intent. Dolores Umbridge presents another terrifying variation. Her power came not from curses, but from righteousness. She hurt not because she hated, but because she believed. When she forced Harry to write, "I must not tell lies," and the words carved into his flesh, it was not a spell from a grimoire's page, it was a perverse merging of order and cruelty. She smiled as she inflicted pain, and that is what makes her darker than many Death Eaters. The spell was secondary. Her soul was the weapon. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, taught a generation about the unforgivable curses, not merely as spells, but as acts of transgression. His demonstration of the Cruciatus curse on the spider was surgical, deliberate, and disturbingly detached. The way he lingered on the suffering, the way he explained it, it wasn't educational, it was indulgent. Even in disguise, the truth of the caster leaks through. He didn't teach the spell to inform, he taught it to taste the echo of cruelty again. The wand is an extension of the wizard, but in dark magic it becomes a mirror. It reflects not only skill, but nature. When Harry used Sectum Sempra on Draco in the bathroom, it was unintentional. He didn't understand what he had unleashed. And the result horrified him. Blood poured, and guilt followed. He never used that spell again, not because he forgot the words, but because the experience had stripped the allure from the curse. Dark magic changes the one who casts it, sometimes with a single stroke. Bellatrix's duel with Molly Weasley in the Battle of Hogwarts is another moment where intent overrides technique. Bellatrix was mocking, dancing, playing, until Molly's fury turned deadly. "Not my daughter, you bitch," she screamed, and the spell she cast wasn't just magic, it was maternal wrath weaponized. That wasn't dark magic per se, but it proves that even righteous anger can produce spells of devastating power. The difference is what the caster becomes afterward. Molly returned to herself. Bellatrix never had anything to return to. Even Voldemort, the Dark Lord himself, relied on more than spells. His mastery of magic was extensive, but it was his philosophy that made him terrifying. He didn't merely kill, he desecrated. He didn't merely control, he annihilated. His Horcruxes were not magical innovations, they were spiritual perversions. He turned murder into ritual, and in doing so, fractured his soul repeatedly. The spells were vessels, the true magic was in his will to mutilate himself for power. In contrast, Dumbledore refused to teach the dark arts not just because they were dangerous, but because he understood their price. He had once dabbled with Grindelwald in dreams of domination, and he saw where it led, to Ariana, broken and lost. Dumbledore could have cast the unforgivable curses. He was powerful enough, but he chose not to, not because he lacked the knowledge, but because he feared what part of himself would awaken if he did. That's the great secret of powerful wizards. They do not avoid dark magic because it's hard. They avoid it because it's easy. Fenrir Greyback, the werewolf who delighted in the fear of children, used almost no spells at all. His magic was in his savagery, but his presence serves to remind us that not all our darkness comes from wands. Some exists beneath the skin. The Ministry failed to understand this. They banned curses, but never addressed the emotions that birthed them, and so every generation produced new monsters. In The Half-Blood Prince, the discovery of Snape's old potions book is illuminating, not just for the spells within, like Levicorpus and Sectum Sempra, but for the marginalia, the scribbled notes, the improvements. These were not just spells, they were manifestations of teenage anger, alienation, and bitterness. They are brilliant, but they are also cries in ink. The dark arts often begin in notebooks, in secrets, in pain left unspoken, and once they are written, they wait to be found. Wands choose the wizard, yes, but dark magic chooses the wound. It responds to what is broken, to what festers. It is no coincidence that so many of Voldemort's followers were wounded men and women, those who had lost status, lost faith, or lost themselves. The magic offered them not healing but vindication. It let them lash out. In a world where most spells solve problems, dark magic merely creates new ones, but it gives its user the illusion of control, and for many that is enough. In the end, the tragedy of the dark arts is not their danger, but their intimacy. They do not possess you like a curse. They seduce you like a whisper. They know your name, your fears, your hungers, and once you begin, the wand no longer matters, because the spell is already inside you. And it is waiting. Number 25. Some books have a dark life of their own. Some books in the Hogwarts library are not meant to be read. Others are not meant to be approached. But a select few, housed in the restricted section behind iron-spelled gates and enchantments thick as dragonhide, are not merely dangerous, they are alive. They do not merely contain darkness, they are darkness. They breathe, they wait, they hunger. Madame Pince, the hawk-eyed librarian, has often been accused of dramatics, but in this case her warnings were not an exaggeration. "You will wear gloves," she once barked at a seventh-year Ravenclaw attempting to access the Ebon lexicon, "or you'll leave this wing with more than paper cuts." Those who know the library well speak of books that murmur when no one's near, that twitch on their own accord, and one, Vox Tenebris, that once screamed for 9 hours until a proper silencing charm was administered by Professor Flitwick himself. The magic that permeates these tomes is not merely passive. Many of these books were written by dark wizards who didn't just encode knowledge into their pages, they embedded pieces of themselves, their hatred, their obsession, their madness. The ink in some of these volumes is not ink at all. In one case, it's rumoured to be the blood of inferi, preserved by stasis charms and dark preservation rituals. In another, the text was burned into flesh parchment using basilisk venom. These aren't legends told to scare first years. These are documented facts locked behind enchanted clasps and the unblinking eye of the librarian. The most unsettling among these is the Chronicles of the Black Oracle. It is a slim book bound in a strange leathery cover that always seems damp, though no moisture is present. The title is never visible until you stare long enough. Then the letters begin to writhe and curl until they form words in a language only the reader understands. Written centuries ago by an obscure cult known only as the Shadowed Tongue, the book claims to contain predictions too vile for human comprehension. The catch, it doesn't show everyone the same future. And sometimes it shows nothing at all, only long blank pages that hum softly, like breath against the ear. According to school records sealed in Professor McGonagall's private files, a Slytherin student named Marius Flint once checked out the Chronicles with permission from his Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. The year was 1943. The permission slip, still preserved, carries a shaky signature from Professor Galatea Merrythought. Within days of accessing the book, Marius ceased attending meals. His dormitory mates reported strange chanting late at night, often in languages they could not recognize. He began sketching runes in charcoal across his walls and muttering to his quill before writing. The final straw came when he carved what appeared to be a summoning circle into the wooden floor of the common room. When staff arrived, Marius was gone. The book was found at the center of the circle, wide open, pulsing slightly as if breathing. What happened to Marius Flint remains unsolved. Some whisper that he transcended physical form. Others say the book consumed him, trading flesh for prophecy. A marginal note, scrawled in the book's final page, in a different hand and ink, reads, "He saw the wrong future." Professor Merrythought retired the following term. She reportedly refused to speak of the incident for the rest of her days. Not all living books are so dramatic in their consequences. Some whisper instead of scream. The Book of Silent Tongues, kept in a locked case, was originally authored by Elric Grimsbane, an infamous mind mage who believed knowledge should be ingested, literally. He developed spells that allowed books to embed themselves into memory by bypassing conscious learning. The downside? His books occasionally overwrite parts of a reader's personality in the process. One former Ravenclaw prefect, Beatrice Wren, attempted to learn ancient arithmetic curses using Grimsbane's methods. She became fluent in the subject. She also forgot how to write her own name. The Hogwarts staff now insists that any interaction with the Book of Silent Tongues must be supervised by 2 professors and limited to 30 seconds per session. The book remains closed and chained, but still emits a low, velvety sound, like breathing through silk. It is said that if you listen long enough, it starts speaking your name, not in your voice, in your mother's. Then there is Maledictus Manus, a work catalogued as a cursed object rather than mere literature. Its origins are unclear, but its presence was first recorded at Durmstrang Institute, before mysteriously vanishing during the tenure of headmaster Wilbrecht König. The book was found years later in Knockturn Alley, sold as a genuine vampire diary by a toothless hag. When opened at Hogwarts, the book bled, not metaphorically, it bled actual warm blood onto the table. No spells could dry it. The book was sealed and buried for a time beneath the herbology greenhouses. When Professor Sprout discovered the roots of her mandrakes growing into the shape of letters, she had the book excavated and returned to the restricted section, bound in silver thread rope and locked behind a Gringotts curse. The most peculiar aspect of living books is their ability to shift content depending on who opens them. The Book of Broken Mirrors, for example, contains over 100 blank pages, but when read by someone who has committed an unforgivable act, whether magical or moral, the pages burst into flame and reveal the memory of that act in horrifying, exaggerated detail. The book is used now only under court. Orders, mostly in cases involving dark artifact smuggling or illegal memory tampering. Some argue that the books in the restricted section should be destroyed, but others insist that knowledge, no matter how dangerous, must be preserved. Dumbledore himself once said, "Darkness cannot be removed by denial, only by understanding can it be overcome." He is believed to have personally handled The Tongue of Ash, a volume so ancient its language predates Latin. The only known passage translated reads, "To read is to become, to know is to obey." Dumbledore never permitted it to be opened again. He placed 13 different enchantments on it and had it entombed beneath the moving staircase in the East Tower, where few dare tread. Perhaps the most tragic tale is that of Lyra's Codex. It is a children's book, deceptively sweet in appearance, with illustrations that seem to dance. But this book was authored by a witch who had lost all her children to war. She bound their memories, twisted and grief-stricken, into the story. It reads differently for each person, adapting itself to a lost loved one. Readers often emerge in tears, convinced they've spoken to someone long gone. Some become addicted to this illusion. One fourth-year Hufflepuff was found rereading it 70 times in a single week, whispering to someone who wasn't there he had to be treated in St. Mungo's spell-induced psychosis ward. These books do not merely contain the dark arts. They are the dark arts. They blur the line between object and entity, between tool and predator. They feed not on spells or potions, but on emotion, on the fear, fascination, guilt, and curiosity of those who dare to open them. Their sentience is not artificial, it is cultivated. Some books resist opening altogether unless certain conditions are met, a whispered phrase, a drop of blood, a full moon, and once they open, they don't always close. One might think the books are watched, tracked, kept secure, but even within the walls of Hogwarts these tomes have minds of their own. The grinning Codex once vanished for 3 weeks, only to be found under the bed of a third-year student who swore she'd never seen it before. When opened, the book simply repeated one sentence, over and over. "I found you first." The Ministry has tried to catalogue these anomalies. A division of the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes exists solely to investigate rogue books. They have recovered titles such as The Ink That Hunts, Paper Veins, and The Grimoire of Unending Hunger. These books are stored in the department's deep vaults alongside cursed jewellery and sentient mirrors, but Hogwarts remains unique in that it does not destroy them. It studies them, it respects them, and perhaps it fears them. There is a subtle power in books. Most students, when entering the library for the first time, feel a strange pressure in their chest, a hum in the air like static before a lightning storm. That feeling is not imagination, it is magic, and it is alive. Every shelf holds more than parchment and binding. Some whisper, some watch, and some wait. There is one final book no one admits exists. It has no name. It is bound in black fabric stitched shut with unicorn hair. Its pages cannot be turned, not with magic, not with blades. Yet it has grown thicker over time. Professor Binns, in one rare moment of lucidity, mentioned it during a History of Magic lecture, calling it the book that writes itself. It allegedly records dark deeds committed in Hogwarts itself, but no one knows where it's kept. Some say it's hidden in the wall behind the Mirror of Erist. Others believe it's in the headmaster's quarters, whispering its truths when the castle sleeps. In the end, the most terrifying truth is not that books can think, but that they may know us better than we know ourselves. For magic, when left alone long enough, does not fade. It grows curious, it grows restless, and the darkest spells are not the ones spoken aloud, they are the ones written, waiting to be read. Number 26. Dark amulets can awaken fear and submission. In the shadowy corners of magical history, where few dare to linger, the existence of certain objects defies the traditional boundaries between charm and curse. Among these, dark amulets hold a particularly haunting legacy. Unlike protective talismans carried by wizards for luck or love, these objects were not crafted to shield, but to conquer. Their power lies not in the flashy brilliance of a spell, but in something far more insidious: fear. A fear so deeply rooted it shakes the soul and bends the will. The magical community has always whispered about such items, yet few understand the extent to which they were used to dominate minds, bend morals, and enslave hearts. One of the most disturbing examples comes from a time before the Statute of Secrecy, when the magical and non-magical worlds brushed shoulders with dangerous frequency. Deep in the medieval records of the Department of Magical Artifact, under layers of dust and silence, lies a description of a relic known as the Mors Mordre ring, Koltso Mors Mortis in the old Slavonic scrolls of Eastern Europe. This ring, encased in tarnished silver and embedded with an onyx carved into the shape of a snake swallowing its own tail, was said to possess the capacity to shatter resolve with mere eye contact. It needed no incantation, no wand movement. Its magic was purely ambient, quietly alive and terrifyingly potent. It is believed the ring was first crafted in the 12th century by a dark warlock known only as Ceolric the Pale. Ceolric was infamous for manipulating entire villages into submission without lifting his wand. While his contemporaries employed brute magical force or vast armies of inferi, Ceolric's method was subtle. He walked into a settlement alone, wearing the ring, and within hours the entire population had surrendered their homes, livestock, and magical children. Some records claim the villagers would fall to their knees, weeping and clutching their heads as if a terrible pressure had built inside their minds. Others wandered off into the woods, never to return. What united every testimony was a sense of inevitability, that resistance was not only futile, but inconceivable. Dark amulets like the Mors Mordre ring worked through emotional alchemy. Rather than launching direct attacks, they manipulated the very essence of human weakness. When a person with a fragile psyche encountered the ring's aura, their inner fears amplified beyond control. What started as anxiety became dread. Dread, in turn, became surrender. According to a confidential aura report housed within the Department of Mysteries, the ring created a magical resonance field that subtly adjusted the victim's neuro-magical equilibrium. In layman's terms, it rewrote fear into obedience. The dark mark that hovered in the sky after Death Eater attacks during Voldemort's reign served a similar psychological purpose. You know whose symbol, the dark mark. It's his mark, the sign of the Death Eaters. It terrifies people, said Arthur Weasley in Goblet of Fire. But while the mark was used as a warning after destruction, the Mors Mordre ring acted before blood was shed, ensuring there would be no resistance to begin with. Unlike cursed objects that exact pain or cause hallucinations, dark amulets are more refined in their cruelty. They understand the value of breaking a mind before a body. The Mors Mordre ring's greatest weapon was its wearer's patience. Ceolric would allow the amulet's aura to fester in a population for hours or even days before making any demands. The villagers, hollowed by supernatural despair, would welcome him as a savior rather than a conqueror. Some texts suggest they even thanked him. The human heart, wrote the 15th century historian Magda Lestrange, is like a wand in the wrong hands, bendable, breakable, and utterly blind to its own manipulation. When the Mors Mordre ring finally vanished from history, it was not due to a heroic defeat, but through quiet concealment. A group of early magical enforcers, precursors to today's auras, led by a witch named Calandra Thrace, undertook an off-the-books mission to capture Ceolric. While the records do not explain how he was neutralized, what follows is chilling. Calandra sealed the ring inside an iron box etched with repulsion runes and entombed it in the roots of the Forbidden Forest. Her final entry in the classified journal reads, "The ring breathes. Even when locked away, its whispers continue. I have warded the ground with silver leaf and blood. Let no fool dig too deep." The idea that such artifacts still exist today is not a matter of speculation. It's a reality that few within the ministry are willing to address openly. While the Department of Magical Law Enforcement denies possession of the ring, insiders suggest it is catalogued in Vault T93 within the ministry's artifact containment wing, accessible only to the unspeakables. Other amulets, less powerful but similarly disturbing, have turned up occasionally in the black market or in the ruins of old wizarding manors. The Gaunt Shack, ancestral home of Voldemort's family, was said to have contained fragments of such magic, embedded in personal items and family heirlooms. In truth, dark amulets function on a spectrum, and not all require eye contact or proximity to function. Some are known to activate based on emotional resonance. The so-called Veil of Thorns, a pendant believed to have originated in northern Africa, reacts to guilt. Worn by a thief who later confessed to authorities, the veil grew hotter the more remorse the individual felt, eventually leaving burns across his chest in the shape of twisting vines. Another artifact, known as the Whispering Coin, compels its bearer to obey whispered suggestions, but only if they come from a dominant magical presence. Weak minds submit, stronger ones feel only headaches and nausea. Even in more recent times, rumours persist. During the First Wizarding War, a small village near Leeds was reportedly found abandoned. No signs of struggle, no bodies, only wands and clothing laid out in neat rows along the road. The only clue? A single obsidian charm found in the village square, shaped like an eye with no iris. It was confiscated and has never appeared in any known registry since. Former Aura Myra Finch, who investigated the case, later retired with the statement, "There are things we should not wear, just as there are doors we should not open." The psychology behind the effectiveness of these amulets lies in the primal fear of loss of control, safety, or autonomy. Dark magic does not create these fears, it amplifies them. That's why such objects are especially effective against muggles and squibs, who lack the inner magical resistance that a trained wizard or witch might develop. However, even within the magical community, not all are immune. The ring, according to the Forbidden Compendium Tenebris Codex, was designed to bypass occlumency defenses by targeting subconscious insecurities rather than conscious thought. It is no coincidence that Voldemort himself was obsessed with objects that carried fragments of power. His Horcruxes were in some ways an echo of this older tradition. But where Horcruxes housed his soul, dark amulets required yours. They did not contain a part of the Creator. Instead, they demanded something from the wearer or the viewer: faith, fear, loyalty. They thrived on psychological submission, and their true cruelty was that they made it feel like your own decision. One of the only known modern encounters with such an amulet occurred in 1978, when a young witch named Lenora Glass found a necklace hidden in a hollow wall in her ancestral home. Within days, her behavior shifted. She began speaking in archaic dialects, drew symbols in ash on her floor, and insisted that someone called the Gasping Voice would come for supper. Her wand was found charred. The necklace, which pulsed in rhythm with her breath, was taken to the Department of Mysteries. She was institutionalized in St. Mungo's and has not spoken in over 40 years. The artifact, according to insider reports, has never stopped pulsing. Those who study these objects, mostly from behind layers of enchantments and shielding runes, warn that the reason they're so rare today is not because they've been destroyed, but because they've been hidden, buried, sealed, guarded. The same way ancient magical creatures like basilisks slumber in silence for centuries, waiting. These amulets too wait, not for a wielder, but for an opportunity. Fear is timeless, and fear is fertile ground. Not every cursed object qualifies as a dark amulet. Items like the Hand of Glory or cursed opals merely cause misfortune or mislead. True dark amulets change the wearer or the viewer on a fundamental level. They do not serve a master, they create one. That is the difference. When Saelric walked into a village, he did not need to speak. The ring spoke in silence, louder than any proclamation. The Department of Magical Artifacts continues to update its registry with potential threats, yet whispers suggest there are some items that remain classified even from the highest auras. They are called living binds, artifacts that not only inspire fear, but grow stronger with every act of submission they cause. Each time someone gives in to despair, the item feeds. The Morsmorder ring, according to this theory, may not be dormant at all. It may be waiting to be found. Or worse, it may already be worn. Few know that in the back of The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, the very textbook used at Hogwarts for defense against the dark arts, there is a passage referencing artifacts too dangerous to name, sealed in vaults behind doors that do not open from this side. It's likely this was not hyperbole. Some vaults, they say, are not locked with keys, but with fear itself. If you do not fear what is inside, it opens to you, which paradoxically makes it most accessible to those who are either extraordinarily brave or completely mad. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of these artifacts is not in the pain they cause, but in the choices they erase. When fear becomes the dominant force in a village, a home, or a heart, resistance becomes a myth. And when surrender feels like salvation, evil no longer needs to shout, it merely needs to wait. And so, the Morsmorder ring, like others of its kind, lingers in the murk of magical history, unspoken, unclaimed, and undefeated. Whether buried in the earth, hidden in a vault, or hanging unnoticed on the neck of a forgotten collector, one truth remains: fear has a shape. And sometimes it wears silver. Number 27, some spells feed on pain, not just others, but your own. There is a kind of magic that demands more than a wand flick and a whispered word. Some spells devour not just the enemy, but the soul of the caster. In the shadowed corners of the dark arts, there exists a forgotten breed of enchantments, those that feed not merely on the pain of others, but on the anguish of the wizard himself. These are spells so potent, so inherently cruel, that they burn through the very essence of the one who casts them. They do not forgive. They do not forget. They linger like old scars, etched in places no healing charm can reach. Among these arcane and forbidden spells, one stands as a chilling example: Murmuris Noctem, roughly translated from ancient Latin as Whispers of the Night. It is neither in the Hogwarts library nor in the restricted section, and even the shelves of Borgin and Burke's remain quiet about it. Its existence is whispered only among those who have walked too far into the dark and returned only halfway. The spell is not taught. It is felt. The wand is only a conduit. The real power comes from within, and that is what makes it monstrous. Unlike the Killing Curse, which requires intent but not emotional cost, Murmuris Noctem demands suffering. The more excruciating the pain, the more devastating the result. It is said that the spell can dissolve bones, fracture air, and silence all light, but its price is irreversible. Pain for power, agony for annihilation. And the pain must be real, not imagined or fabricated. It must come from a place so deep it scrapes against the soul. The story of Thaddeus Mulciber, the elder brother of the better-known Death Eater Mulciber, is the most well-documented use of Murmuris Noctem. Thaddeus, a recluse even among the Dark Lord's followers, lived in a decaying estate outside Cokeworth. When his Muggle-born wife, Isadora, was executed by rogue vigilantes after Voldemort's fall, something in him unravelled. The reports are fragmentary, but they tell of a single night in 1999 when an entire squad of Aurors dispatched to investigate the property vanished without trace. The Ministry records mark the event as a magical implosion, a term reserved for incidents so poorly understood that bureaucracy surrenders to euphemism. Survivors in the area spoke of voices screaming in the wind, of blood seeping from the cracks of walls, and of their own dreams being invaded by shadows with teeth. One phrase appeared again and again from those who lived nearby. He cried it into the sky. No one saw Thaddeus again. But his wand was found, snapped in two, and beside it, etched into the soil in what looked like blood, was a single word: Murmuris. There are many theories about the mechanics of spells like this. Dumbledore once said dark magic leaves traces, very often peculiar ones. But even he, in all his wisdom, never hinted at spells that consume, perhaps because even to speak of them gives them shape. The idea that magic responds not just to words, but to raw, unfiltered pain, shatters our understanding of magical theory. What does it mean if grief becomes a fuel, if mourning becomes a trigger? Tom Riddle never used these spells. Not because he didn't know them, but because he didn't qualify. He inflicted suffering, yes, but he never felt it. He had no capacity for the kind of despair that breathes life into Murmuris Noctem. His heart was calcified. The spell would not have listened. In contrast, Severus Snape, whose life was shaped by regret, bitterness, and unspoken love, was one of the few living wizards who might have accessed such magic. But he never did. Perhaps he knew the price too well, or perhaps he believed some costs should never be paid. There is also the tale of Valeria Greengrass, aunt of Astoria and Daphne, a gifted duelist who vanished during the First Wizarding War. She had been engaged to an Auror named Tobias Flint, who was slain in a Death Eater ambush near Inverness. 2 days later, the manor of the Lestranges was found drenched in unexplainable silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of trauma. All birds fled the trees, the air did not move. And in the middle of the garden, carved into the frozen fountain, was the sigil of Nox Cor, the Heart of Night, a variant of Murmuris Noctem. Valeria was never seen again. Healers and curse breakers believe such spells extract their toll not immediately, but slowly, like poison. The magic seeps inward, closing doors that never reopen. The price is not death, it's ruin, physical, emotional, or otherwise. Thaddeus Mulciber lost his voice. Valeria Greengrass lost herself. Others went mad, their minds folding in on themselves like collapsing stars. The spell is not a choice. It is a last breath turned weapon, a scream forged into flame. It is curious how such knowledge persists. Hogwarts no longer teaches anything deeper than the unforgivable curses. The deeper curses, those that require your soul to bleed, are left unmentioned, undocumented, but magic remembers, and so do wands. Ollivanders once said, "The wand chooses the wizard," but what is less known is that a wand, once exposed to a spell like Murmuris, never forgets it. There are stories of wands whispering the incantation during thunderstorms, of wand woods that go dark and cold in the caster's hand, as if the spell itself leaves behind a ghost. One of the only known attempts to study the spell academically came from an obscure text called Tenebris Vivens, authored by a half-blind warlock named Morwen Trask. She described Murmuris Noctem as an echo of mourning made solid by will. She hypothesized that these spells are not man-made but discovered, raw magical entities floating in the ether, waiting for a soul fractured enough to call them down. Her book was banned by the Ministry and is now housed in a private vault in the Department of Mysteries. There is also reason to believe that such spells function as a form of magical imprinting. Once cast, they form a link between the spell and the caster that cannot be severed. Think of it as a ritual branding. The caster becomes the locus of an ancient grief force, and the world reacts accordingly. Animals shun them. Mirrors show different reflections. Their Patronus, if they can still summon one, flickers with broken light. They are never the same.